Okay, so we're in chapter 16. Chapter 16, that's page 68 if you have the book in front of you. And last week we said that there is a general rule, that's how we called it, klal godol. There is a fundamental principle of being a Beinoni that we started to speak about last week. And we're going to unpack it a little further this week. And I'm hoping that we'll have the opportunity to get to the second fundamental principle, because that has a lot of bearing for us. Because the second principle that we're going to learn is, what do you do if you're not connecting in the way that you should? Now that should have really been the topic of last week, because last week we didn't connect in the way that we should. The technology kept letting us down, so it would have been more appropriate to learn about this last week. But Hashem runs the show, and he decided that this is how it has to play out. So let's just recap quickly, what is the first fundamental principle of the Beinoni? That's the first thing we have to ask ourselves. So what did we learn last week? Anybody remember? The first fundamental principle of the Beinoni is that you have to use your mind to direct and control your emotions. Okay, that was the first thing that we learned as a Beinoni, or that's the fundamental principle of the Beinoni. That a person has to have their mind direct and control their emotions. And we spent quite a bit of time talking about this yesterday, and the importance of understanding this principle, and how that is something which is so unique to the experience of being a human, and specifically to the experience of a person being able to grow and develop themselves spiritually. It's really, really important. And it's really important for us to understand that we are effectively beings that, if left to our own devices, do the exact opposite. When I say devices, I don't mean your phone. We do the exact opposite. We allow our emotions and our impulses to rule our minds. I actually heard something very interesting this week. It was from a scientific source, not from a Jewish source. And effectively, what they were saying is that the human being is designed in such a way that we always focus on short-term pleasure over long-term meaning. So the particular conversation was a conversation around smoking. And, it's in fact, I heard this particular thing, which was, like I said, from a scientific source. And then I actually heard somebody who was talking about quitting smoking. It was in two completely different settings. The person who was talking about quitting smoking said something which I thought was incredibly intriguing. You know, they put those big disclaimers and warning labels on the cigarette boxes? Smoking is bad for your health, or smoking kills, or whatever the case is. So this person who was talking about his journey to quit smoking said that whenever he'd take a box of cigarettes and see that warning label, it would make him more anxious, which caused him to smoke more. Completely defeated the purpose. Now, when somebody who's not a smoker, I can't relate to it. I don't understand that concept. What do you mean? They're telling you this thing's killing you, and your response is to have more of it. It's just such a weird thing. Easy for a person to judge when we're talking about a vice that we don't have. But if we were to translate that into a vice that we do have, exactly the same thing. So you could replace smoking with eating junk food, binging social media or TV series, harboring resentment when we know that it's actually damaging us more than it's damaging the other person, speaking negatively. I know there's so many examples of the same principle. So the scientific position that this person was sharing is that that's how human beings are wired, that it's natural for us to pursue something that will give us a good feeling in the now, a dopamine rush in the now, rather than to have an investment in something that will pay off in the future. Now, what the Alter Rebbe argues is we might very well be wired that way, but it is also part of our wiring and part of our nature to be able to reverse the process. And that's really what distinguishes us from lower life forms, is that we're able to use our minds to learn, to process, to appreciate, to shift, to see objective value, and then to develop an interest in that objective value. So that's the first klal godol of Beinoni. The first fundamental principle of the Beinoni is fire up the brain, make sure that we're intellectually alive, make sure that we contemplate things which are meaningful and that illustrate to us the value of what is right, the value of a relationship with Hashem, and that will assist us to be able to overcome all of those impulses that pull us in the wrong directions. Now, we haven't finished this conversation yet, because there's a very important aspect, possibly you could call it a detail of this conversation, that we still have to explore. Okay? And what that really is we're going to say, let's just unpack this and understand this a little bit better. If it's true that I'm going to have this deep contemplation and use my mind and focus on the greatness of Hashem and appreciate what it does for my neshama to have a relationship, etc., etc., how much is that going to influence our behavior? That's really where we're going to be looking now. So if you're looking in the book, we are literally on the fourth line. We're on the fourth line of the chapter. The truth is on the screen. It's also the fourth line. And we are at the third last word. Can you see that word? Keshem. So the last thing that he said was that our goal and the cardinal rule of the Beinoni is that you have to be able to fire up your neshama and your intellectual powers to such an extent that you can contemplate Hashem's greatness, and that will ensure that you don't just dissolve into your impulsive behavior. So how do you get there? He says, the process, which is a process we've already discussed in the previous chapter, is that you have to contemplate in your mind Bigdulas Ein Sof Baruch Hu, Hashem's greatness. Now, there are many ways that we could refer to Hashem, and over here we're choosing a specific way to refer to Hashem. Ein Sof Baruch Hu. We have to contemplate Hashem's, in modern Hebrew they'd use the expression Ein Sofi Yut, which basically means his infinity. Now, there's a big problem when people hear the word infinity. Big problem. What's the problem? When people hear the word infinity, they automatically, without even realizing it, make it finite. What do I mean by that? If somebody had to say to you infinite, and this is something we've discussed before, but it's worth revisiting because it's such an important principle. If somebody had to say to you that something is infinite, what's your immediate association? Infinite means it is what?
Never ending.
Never ending, right? Never ending. And for most people, when they use the expression never ending, they're thinking specifically about time. So the most common association that people have with infinity is time. And then the next most common is distance, right? So what that does is it takes Ein Sof, which we're very loosely translating over here as infinite, and you make it finite. You say it's infinite in this area. So it's infinite in the area of time. It's infinite. It's forever. It's infinite in the concept of space. So not just distance, but space. So it extends forever. Now the problem with that is, the minute you have a working definition for infinite, by definition, it's not infinite. Right? So as Gary comments, the finite mind cannot comprehend infinity. That's right, Gary's point. The finite mind cannot comprehend infinity. Therefore, if I'm comprehending, it's obviously not infinity.
Can we not say it is immeasurable?
Okay, so there's another word, immeasurable, okay? So we're going to use the word immeasurable. Now, what is the difference between saying infinite and immeasurable? We're surely saying the same kind of thing. Infinite means I cannot give it a finite space-time definition. And if I say it's immeasurable, I'm effectively saying I cannot measure the time that it takes or the time that it will exist or the space that it occupies. So it sounds very, very similar. The word Ein Sof, or the phrase Ein Sof, because it's not a single word, the phrase Ein Sof is such a profound statement because Ein Sof means without soif, without an end. Now let's explore end for a moment. Let's say that you're sitting at a table right now, as we are in the room, okay? You're sitting at a table. Does the table have an end? Yes, everybody's happy. Everybody's very comfortable to agree that the table has an end. That is incorrect. The table has ends. Now, I don't only mean spatially, Yes, of course, there's the one end to the right, and there's the other end to the left, and there's another end ahead of me, and there's the other end that's closest to me, and then there's the end of how tall it is. And all of that is true. That means that the table has a soif, but that's not the only soif. It's not the only soif. It's not the only end of this table. The end of this table will come in a certain period of time as well. Because in a certain period of time, it will no longer be a table. Either because it eventually becomes old and decrepit and useless, or because we have a really good farbrengen and they dance on the tables and that's the end of the table. But the fact is, there's an end. There's the possibility of an end, not only in space. Currently there's an end in space, but the truth is, there's at some point going to be an end in time.
But Hashem could decide, okay, the table's gone.
Of course, then it has an end.
Yeah.
Right? So, the table clearly has ends. That means both in terms of the structure of the table, it ends in various directions, and conceptually, there are various ways in which the table ends. Now, right now, because of the nature of this shiur, there are some people sitting in the room who can see the table, and there are some people watching this online who can only hear about the table. So to them, they have no idea if this table is mahogany wood or El Cheapo plastic. They have no idea if this table was handcrafted or bought from IKEA. Well, of course, if you live in South Africa, you know it didn't come from IKEA, but that's a side point. So, you have no concept of the table, which means that in your experience watching this online, the table ends before it begins. Meaning to say, it hasn't even entered your reality. So where does the table live for you? Where does it begin and end for you? As an idea. In the abstract. As a concept. And quite frankly, you have more options on this table than I do. Because for me, the table is this table. And that's what it is. For you, every time you think about this table, you are welcome to think of any kind of table that you want, in any color, made of any material, of any practical size. Gesund to hate. So, where does the table end for you? It ends the minute you start thinking about something else, because it only exists for you in the abstract as a concept. The minute you start thinking about something else, the table ended. Because it was never really there. So as soon as you're no longer thinking about it, it's gone. There's another way that the table ends. The other way that the table ends is, it ends at the parameters of what tables are. In other words, if I would look at this, let's assume that I had never seen a table before in my life, for whatever odd reason, and I walked into the room and thought this is food. Okay, that's a pretty radical example, right? So, and then I come over and I'm ravenous, and I decide I'm going to take a bite out of the table. That's a crazy example, right? But let's just say that I did that. Very clearly, what's going to happen is my teeth are going to end. And the table is clearly going to illustrate that its utility ends before food. Meaning to say, it can't do that. It can carry food, it can present food, it cannot be food. So it ends there as well. In other words, when we talk about the word soif, or something which is finite, we're not purely talking about dimensions, nor are we talking about lifespan. When we say that something has a soif, when we say that something is finite, what we're saying is that this thing has limitations. And not all limitations are created equally. Some of them are measurable. Some of them are immeasurable. There are immeasurable limitations. Can I give you an example of an immeasurable limitation? Okay, let's go back to our table. So I pull out my tape measure, and I say, the measurable limitation of this table is, whatever it is, 1.2 meters, or whatever it is, 1.5 meters. I don't know exactly what the length of the table is, right? So that's the measurable limit of the table. Now, should we work out the immeasurable limit of the table? You ready? Let's start. Is the table a chair? No. Is the table a person? No. Is the table a piece of food? No. Is the table... Do you see where I'm going with this? There are immeasurable limits on this table. pretty much every other thing that exists is not this table. So that's how much limitation there is to the table. There's almost, just to borrow the term, there's almost an infinite amount of limits on this table. It's a bizarre concept, right? We don't think that way. Whenever we think about limitations, whenever we think about a soif, an edge, a parameter, we're always thinking about the things that we can quantify, not considering that there are a whole lot of things we cannot quantify that are also limits. So therefore, when we say that Hashem is Ein Soif, and not only say it because the Alter Rebbe is telling us over here that we have to be misboinen, we have to contemplate the idea that Hashem is Ein Soif. What we have to contemplate is the concept that Hashem has no limitation. Not no end, even though that's the direct translation. But the concept is no limitation. So is there a space beyond Hashem? There is not. Is there a time beyond Hashem? No, there is not. And that's how most people understand Ein Sof. Hashem lives forever. Hu haya, hu hayveh, v'hu yiyeh. He was, he is, he always will be. That's how we understand it. We say there's no limit to his space. So we'll use the expression, Meloi chol haaretz kavoidoi. The world is filled with his glory, or the expression that's used in Kabbalistic sources, leis asar ponui mine. There's no place that is void of him. Or as Uncle Moshe would put it much more simply, Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is truly here, right? That's how it is. Most of us understand Ein Sof in those two axes, time and space. Then some people are a little bit more mature in their understanding, and they'll say this. They'll say, human beings have the capacity for love. But human beings have a finite capacity for love, which means there are only a certain amount of people we can have a deep love for. It's not realistic to say I'm going to love every human on the planet. I know a lot of people enjoy saying that, but it's not realistic to actually live that way. And even those people who we deeply love, there are limits to that love. For example, sometimes they misbehave, and then we don't love them so much in that moment. So we say Hashem is infinite. That means Hashem's love is infinite. That would be accurate. That's a more mature understanding of saying Ein Sof. That Hashem's love is absolute and infinite and disregards any conditions, right? It's the most unconditional love that exists. So here's a great example of it. In our davening every day, we ask Hashem for forgiveness, unless it's a Shabbos or a Yontiv or a Chodesh or something like that. But most of the time, we're asking Hashem for forgiveness 3 times a day. Slach lanu v'ninki chatanu, and we even do a whole thing and we clap our chest. Please Hashem forgive us because we have sinned, etc. So we say it in the morning at Shachris, in the morning davening, and then a few hours later, we're back at Mincha, and we're saying the same thing again. Slach lanu v'ninki chatanu. Forgive us. And then, not even half an hour later, we're doing it again in Ma'ariv. Please forgive us. Now later on in Tanya, a lot later on in Tanya, in the 3rd book within Tanya, which is called Igeres HaTeshuvah, which is a whole epistle on Teshuvah. So the Alter Rebbe says, if that was a person, they would throw you out at that point. Imagine you come over to somebody and you say, listen, I'm really, really sorry that I upset you. And then you upset them. And you come straight back and say, I'm really, really sorry that I upset you. And then you upset them again. And then you come straight back. And you say, how long can a person tolerate that kind of thing? Where eventually you say, as the kids always like to say, sorry is not enough. It's not good enough just to say these words. You actually have to make a radical change. Now, we do this every day. It's mandated. It's written into our prayer service that every single day we're supposed to say, Slach lanu, please forgive us because we did things we were not supposed to do that you told us not to do, and we did them anyway. And then, between Shachris and Mincha, we go do them again, and then we come back to Mincha and say, so sorry I did those things. Please forgive me. And then we go home and we do them again. And the next morning, forgive me. How long do you think Hashem should tolerate this? Well, the answer, says the Alter Rebbe, is that Hashem is infinite. And therefore infinite means if he has the capacity for forgiveness, it's an infinite capacity for forgiveness. It's not like the human experience. We run out of steam, we run out of patience, we get annoyed, we get irritated, what's going on, how many times are you coming back with the same thing, repetitive behavior, sort yourself out. But Hashem has an infinite version of every trait that exists. So when we speak about wisdom and you think about the smartest person in our lives or the smartest person in history, no matter how intelligent they are, it's finite intelligence. When Hashem has intelligence, infinite intelligence. Whatever that means. We can't really comprehend what that means. But suffice it to say, it means knows everything in all of the detail that anything could ever be known, which is effectively infinite detail. But that is not yet the full scale of Ein Sof. So you've got to think about this, you've got to contemplate on it, but that's not the full scale.
So does a tzaddik have different davening?
Beinoni has different davening.
I'm saying a tzaddik won't have to say sorry.
Oh, are you saying specifically about saying sorry? Does a tzaddik have to say Salach Lanu? That's an excellent question. Because the perception that we have is Salach Lanu means I really messed up and therefore I have to apologize. But the truth of the matter is that the word we use is ki chatonu, which references a particular kind of behavior called a chet. So there are different kinds. We're a very elaborate. The Torah has a very elaborate language for Averis. So we have the word pesha. Pesha is where a person maliciously rebelled against what Hashem wants. We have the word avoin, which is interchangeable with the word avera. That's where we transgressed something we shouldn't have done. It might not have been malicious, but it was conscious. Then we have shagoga, which is essentially when a person, and we say that, by the way, in the davening on where do we say it? On Yom Kippur, right? Visi, Pashati, Shagagti, whatever. No, not there. We have it somewhere. Maybe it's in the minor lashon that you say at a tzaddik's grave. Anyway, so that is when a person does something that is a transgression, but it's completely unintended. And then you get what is called a chet. And chet is a term that people very often misunderstand because we have a verse in the Tanakh where the word chet is actually used to represent not being perfect. In other words, it represents lack. So a tzaddik can say chatanu, that we have done things that are not as they should be. They're not.
You think chet is all the other things.
Yeah, exactly. So the tzaddik can actually say slach lanu v'ki chatanu.
Is the shorish katan?
No, the shorish is the word chet, and the actual word is ches tes aleph. The actual meaning of the word chet is a lack, right? But the truth of the matter is, the tzaddik also says the next part, pashanu, which is to do a sin of focus, of malice. And the answer to that, which Gary already put over here in the chat, is that a tzaddik speaks in the plural. We also speak in the plural when we daven. We say pashanu, all of us have sinned. The difference is that the tzaddik doesn't just say, all of us have sinned. The tzaddik says, if there are people who have sinned, I haven't done my job properly. So there's room for teshuvah there too. Okay. Okay, so that's the next layer of understanding infinity, right? That Hashem is Ein Sof, that every trait that Hashem has, He has in the most unbridled, unlimited fashion. But the ultimate appreciation of what Ein Sof means is that there is nothing that can limit Hashem, which means this. There's those pseudo-philosophers, and I say pseudo, you'll see why in a second, who love to get caught up in the question, can God create a stone that He cannot lift? And they think, Azoi, we are so smart, we have snookered God. Because if He can create a stone that He cannot lift, well then He's weak, because He cannot lift it.
What is create?
And if Hashem cannot create a stone that He cannot lift, then He's limited in what He can create. Snooker! Thing is, it's actually a ridiculous question in the first place. It's a ridiculous question. I'll explain to you how it's a ridiculous question. Let me ask you this. Can a person have a session with a personal trainer that hurts and they enjoy it?
Apparently, yes.
Apparently, yes, right? We're talking over here, obviously, to the big,
Hypothetical.
yeah, correct. This is the leading edge of the fitness world, where probably the people who are not at the shir are at the gym. So, but hypothetically, that's what's supposed to happen, right? That you're supposed to be able to be put through your paces to the extent that you feel like your muscles are burning and you're chalishing and whatever, and it's so geschmack, it's so amazing. Which means if somebody had to pose the question, imagine somebody had to pose the question to an individual who's very dedicated to their personal health and their workout, etc. Imagine somebody had to pose the question, could you have a gym session that is painful and you love it? They'd say, obviously, yes. Now, in the person's mind, they think, no, it's not possible. Either you love it or it hurts. Because in most scenarios in life, if something is painful, we don't enjoy it. Like, for example, nobody's going to say, could you go have a root canal and love it? Nobody's going to ask that question because it's a ridiculous question to ask. But it is possible for a person to put themselves through a painful experience on a daily basis and love every minute of it. Why? Because it depends on your reality. It depends on your frame of reference. So in our frame of reference, the human frame of reference, things are binary. Either you can do them or you cannot do them. That's how it works. Either you can produce this product, the stone you cannot lift, or you cannot produce this product. But in Hashem's reality, Ein Sof. There are no limits.
You can do both.
Which means that Hashem can create a stone that he cannot lift and be able to lift it and not lift it at the same time. Now, to us, that just spins our neurons in circles and we don't understand what on earth it means. But that's what Ein Sof is. It's impossible for us to perceive because we live so embedded in the world of Sofiyut, in the world of finitude. Everything about us needs to be defined, otherwise we don't know what to do with it. Why do people carry a lot of anxiety? Because the future is undefined. I don't know what's going to happen, therefore I'm anxious. We need to know. That's our obsession with control. We need to know what's going to happen. When's it going to happen? It's like, for those people, I don't know if this happens in other places in the world. Where I don't know if there's people here from other countries. I don't know if there are such things as neighborhood WhatsApp groups. Do they exist in other parts of the world? Neighborhood WhatsApp. They exist. Okay, Baruch Hashem, they exist. So well, you don't know. You don't know. In fact, one of our kids today just sent a thing that they had no water in Jerusalem. So it can happen. In any event, so what do people do on those neighborhood groups? Generally, most of the conversation on neighborhood groups, and I assume that this is a global phenomenon, is people ask rhetorical questions that nobody else in the group could answer. Right? Like, when's the water coming back on? I don't work for the water utility. Why am I getting 6 questions from different neighbors? When's the water coming back on? I don't know. There was a period, by the way. There was a period of time, Baruch Hashem, it stopped. There was a period of time where any time, if there was a power outage, any time there was a particular individual in the community who would send me a personal question, personal WhatsApp, when is the power coming back on? I'm thinking, listen, I know many things about many things, but I don't know anything about that. If you want to ask me about a halacha, maybe I might have the answer. You want to ask me what it says in Tanya, I might have the answer. You want me to tell you when the power's coming back? I have absolutely no idea. So why do people ask those questions? Why do people post those rhetorical questions on those groups? Because we need everything to be finite in our lives. Somebody has to give me the answer. When is this going to happen? How will it work? It's like one of my favorites. You were talking about the water. One of my favorites is when people post at like 11 p.m. Has anybody else heard that noise? Maybe I have. I have no idea. No idea. I don't know what noise you're talking about. I don't know where you live. I don't know what noise you're talking about. But people have this need to create boundaries. Give me a definition. Tell me, what was the noise? Where did it come from? So the whole makeup of the human being is to create definition. In fact, what we're doing right now, which is called learning, the whole process of learning is defining concepts. When we begin a learning process, the concept is abstract, and that makes us uneasy or bored. And as we learn more, so the concept becomes clearer, and that satisfies us and inspires us. Because the whole human experience is trying to define as much as we possibly can about our lives. So how can we relate to Ein Sof that Hashem cannot be defined by anything, cannot be confined by anything? So when we spend a bit of time and we contemplate this concept, the incredible, incredible greatness of Hashem, then you realize, Lahoilid, let's read more inside, Lahoilid mi binasoi ruach da'as, that intellectual analysis will produce a very unique intellectual state called da'as, which we'll come back to in a second. And as a result of that da'as, you'll have a yiras Hashem b'moichoi. You'll have an intellectual appreciation of awe of Hashem. Now, it's really important that we define what we're talking about over here, because when we get to the part about our inadequacies, this is going to be really important. This little bit of information is going to be relevant to the inadequacies we're going to speak about a little bit later in the chapter. So, in order to do this, let's just pause for a second and understand a broad sense of how the human system operates. Okay? A high level, broad sense of how the human system operates. So, humans, we're going to speak in very general terms for a second. Humans are part brain and part heart. Okay? Now, what I mean by that means we have, and we use this expression a lot in Hasidus especially, we use the expression moichin. We've already touched on that word here. We said mispoinen b'moichoi. So moichin, the moach is a brain. Moichin is the intellectual faculties. And we have another expression we call midos. And many people have many ideas about what midos mean. People think that midos are good character traits. So you often hear people saying it's very important to have good midos. And that is an appropriate use of the term, because that is what it means, that you should have good character. But we need to understand it a little bit better. So let's start with a direct Hebrew translation, Hebrew to English translation. How do you translate the word midah, which is the singular, or midos, which are the plural? How would you translate the word? Anybody know? How do you translate the word midah? Okay, so midah translates as a measurement. The things that define us. That's what our midos are. The things that define our personality, our character, those are our midos. Okay, so could you give me an example of a good midah to have? Compassion. Okay, there's a great one. So compassion is a great midah to have. Is compassion something that comes easily to most? So you have to answer in the most Jewish way possible. You have to say, it depends. Depends. Compassion to who? Compassion for what? Compassion when? So compassion is a great ideal that people have, but it's not necessarily an experience that we always feel. There might be somebody who's deserving of our compassion, but because of circumstances, which might include the fact we didn't sleep enough last night, or that we're stuck in the traffic, or irritated by something else, we might not be able to feel the compassion for them, even though idealistically they deserve the compassion. And that's really the difference between moichin and midos. Moichin is where we're able to analyze things as they are, in their most honest and authentic self, an objective self. Midos are when we start to see how we feel about those things. So there's got to be a bridge between those two worlds. There's got to be a bridge between the world of analysis and the world of feeling, or between the world of research and the world of character development. They are not guarantees. The one does not automatically lead to the other. And if you don't believe that, all you have to do is watch politicians, because they can do such a great job of supplying a whole lot of intellectual information, and all this. They quote the right statistics and they say the right things. In the meantime, it means absolutely nothing in their lives. And the truth is, academics can be that way too sometimes. You can have a person who's got this whole academic thesis about a particular kind of behavior, but they don't practice that behavior. It's not even on the radar in their lives. Why? Because just because something is an intellectual truth does not mean that it filters down into lived experience. So there has to be a bridge. Somewhere between them there has to be a bridge. That bridge is what we call da'as. Da'as is the part of the intellectual process that is not purely intellectual. See, the intellectual process, by definition, is objective. It's clinical. That's what intellect is. Intellect is the objective assessment of data in order to be able to arrive at a conclusion. That's why if you have somebody who's a real academic, they can be so dispassionate about what they're talking about. If you go speak to like a top surgeon, sometimes you could think that they're just a glorified car mechanic. The way that they talk about human beings. So, okay, I think we'll just, we'll replace this valve over here. It's gonna take this long. It's gonna need these steps in order to do it. It's gonna cost that much money. And you feel, but where's the human in this? Because it is possible when a person is a real academic. It is possible for a person to just get caught up in the objectivity and the clinical reality without translating it into anything that is a lived experience, that is personal, that is compassionate. So da'as does not behave like regular intellect. Da'as is where something in concept starts to become personal. Let's use an example. Do you think the following would be responsible? Can you imagine you take a 2-year-old child and you stand at the curb and you tell the child, look left and right and left again. Depending obviously where you live in the world will determine if you're looking left and right or you're looking right and left. Okay? So, and then cross the street. And you do this with a 2-year-old for a month. Every single day for a month. You do this with a 2-year-old. After that month, can you allow the 2-year-old to walk home from school alone? No, why not?
Because it's unlikely that they've understood it.
It's not unlikely. It's impossible. It's impossible that they have the maturity to make that personal enough that it actually means next time I'm on the curb, I have to look before I cross. That's what da'as is. Da'as is the maturity to be able to take a piece of information and to contextualize it in our own lives. You know how many people there are in the world who can tell you all kinds of information about all kinds of things that are totally misaligned with how they actually live their lives? The do as I say, not as I do crowd, which is 90% of humanity. I often heard people joke about the very frum Jew who invites people over on a Saturday night for a meal. So there's a tradition that on Saturday nights, you're also supposed to have bread as part of the meal. It's in honor, it's still considered as if you're extending the honor of Shabbos. So this very frum Jew invites all these people who are not so religious to the table on Saturday night. And he tells them how important it is on Saturday night that you have to have bread, and you all need to go wash and say the brocha, and at the end we're going to bench, and they all go off dutifully and they all do it. They come back to the table and he has started the meal without having any bread. You do it. It's good for you. So da'as is that bridge that takes a concept from just being a sterile, objective piece of information and translates it into something that has personal meaning. Now, if we're going to develop ourselves, if we're going to grow, if we're going to improve our character, there has to be da'as. If I can't translate an idea from an idea into something which is relevant to me personally, then I can't hope to actually start feeling something for that idea. So that's why it says over here that you want to get to a point where you've done the bina, which is the hisboinenus, you've done the contemplation, you've spent a lot of brain time thinking about Hashem's greatness, thinking about the concept of Ein Sof, recognizing just how incredible Hashem is, and now you've got it to the point of da'as, where it's no longer theoretical information. This is actually how I perceive God. So going forward, whenever people say the word God, this is what comes to my mind. Unlike a lot of people who, when they think of God, it's the old man with a beard on the throne, or it's the impatient father who's always getting annoyed at his wayward children, or whatever the particular version is. If I contemplate this will become my version of what Hashem is. I hear the word Hashem and I visualize Ein Sof. That's das. It's mine. You know, the Gemara, for example, talks about somebody who learns to such an extent that they get quoted as if they were the source of the information, even though the information is straight out of the Torah. But it's become so much part and parcel of them that people don't even recognize that it's information they're sharing. They see it as their philosophy, their life's view that they're sharing. That's das. When a person has das about Hashem's greatness, the next natural response, because das will always produce some personal response. When I'm thinking about something in its abstract, in its objective sense, I don't necessarily have a personal response yet. But the moment I think about something and appreciate it, and it becomes personal to me, then I will start to develop a personal response. So my personal response to the da'as about Hashem being Ein Sof is I'm going to be overawed. It's going to be like, whoa, that is big. That's a big deal. And we use, the word that we use for that is yira. Now, most people translate yira as fear. And that's fair, because it is actually the right translation. But there are various kinds of fear. For example, let's keep it really simple. The one kind of fear that a person has is when there's a sound in them at night and they don't know what the sound is, and nobody on the WhatsApp group is responding to tell them what the sound is. So they're afraid, because who knows what it could mean. I mean, the sky could be falling on our heads. That's a pretty immature fear. It's very prevalent, but it's pretty mature. And the truth is, we wouldn't even call that yira, we would call that pachad. Pachad is that heart-racing, spine-tingling kind of fear. Yira would be where a person sees or experiences something that is so big, so overwhelming, that they become very self-conscious and unsure of themselves, like the person who meets the King of England. So in that interaction, the person experiences yira. It's like, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to break protocol. I don't want to make a fool of myself. That's a different kind of fear. That's not a negative fear. That's not an obsessive fear. That's an appropriate fear. I'm afraid of misaligning. So when a person recognizes the greatness of Hashem, Ein Sof, that Hashem is in this completely different reality, that's totally unbridled and unfettered, and there's no limitation, etc., then I have the sense of fear. I don't want to lose that connection, lose that opportunity. And when a person realizes that, then they say, I better get my stuff in order, and then the mind starts to direct the heart so that I behave as I should, not as I feel like.